How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. And today we are heading south into the Arizona territory. We are looking at the story of Russian Bill. Now, there is a lot of mystery surrounding this man's life, which is normally the case when it comes to a lot of these Old West figures. But what we do know is that his name was William Tattenbaum, and he also went by Russian Bill. And the only dates that we know for sure about him are that he was born sometime around the year 1853 and he died on November 9th, 1881. As far as where he was born, some say it was in Russia, while others say he was actually born in New York State. So that's another reason why there is so much confusion surrounding this man. Because if he really was born in Russia, then how did he end up in the New York area? Well, right now, we don't know. There is no record of this man's parents or any kind of family tree of his, so we don't know exactly how he ended up where he ended up. So just so we're clear, this is not a story about a Russian spy who came to America to live among us common folk or anything like that. It's just that there doesn't seem to be any records of his family anywhere, so we don't know where he was born. What we do know is that he came to Arizona territory during the mid-1870s. And this is where our story begins. The first thing that people noticed about Russian Bill when he came to Arizona was that he was an excellent dresser. He always wore the finest clothes that money could buy and kept an immaculate mustache. This would not have been a big deal, except for the fact that most men of the Old West weren't exactly known for their fashion sense. Most men wore whatever they could get their hands on, usually because they didn't have the means to purchase new clothing. And when they did wear something new, it wasn't uncommon for them to wear it until it fell apart. We don't know if Russian Bill was rich or if he was just cheap, but whatever it was, it worked. He stood out like a sore thumb compared to the other residents of the Arizona territory. Now, a lot of times when someone stands out from the crowd, it's either because they're doing something right or they're doing something wrong. In Russian Bill's case, he was doing something wrong, but most of the people he met didn't know that. They just knew he was good-looking and dressed pretty fancy. So they became his friends. Among those he befriended were Ike Clanton, Curly Bill Brocius, and Johnny Ringo. These three men would become infamous themselves as all three would die in shootouts with law enforcement, and it looks like Russian Bill was right there alongside them when it happened. But before we get into that, let's talk about how he got his start in Arizona. Like I said, his exact origins are unknown, and even the stories that claim to know how he got his start are often contradictory and sometimes don't make any sense at all. One such story says that he came to Arizona after working for the U.S. Army as a scout, but he picked up the name Russian Bill long before he made it to the western frontier. According to this account, while working for the military, he defended an Indian village from an attack. And afterwards, the chief of the tribe gifted him a horse that was said to have belonged to a Russian czar. He rode this horse until the day he died, and that is likely how he earned the name Russian Bill. There is no evidence that this story is true, but if it was, it does explain how he earned his name, even if he wasn't actually Russian. Another tale says that he worked as a government scout during the Civil War and later used his knowledge of the land to work as a prospector. He also may have worked as a cowboy for some time, but it was during this time that he earned the ire of the law, allegedly stealing cattle from ranches throughout the West. At some point, he ended up in Tombstone, Arizona, where he continued his criminal career. Whether he stole the horses or just bought them, he owned several pairs of fine horses that he drove across the country with his wagon. It was also in Tombstone that he met the Clanton boys, Ike, Billy, and Turk, along with Johnny Ringo and the others that would become known as the Cowboys. The story goes that Russian Bill arrived in Tombstone driving his team of horses and looking for a buyer. Unfortunately for him, there was no market for horses at the time, so he was forced to stay in town. This is when he met the Clanton boys and the rest of the Cowboys. Before long, he was riding with them, helping them steal cattle and generally causing trouble wherever he went. That is how he ended up in the Shakespeare jail on November 9th, 1881. How he got there is a little vague. We know that he and the Clanton boys were arrested, but the details of the arrest are unknown. We do know that the men in the jail at the time were accused of a wide range of crimes, including murder, horse theft, drunk and disorderly conduct, and being a general nuisance, and it was that last charge that got them in the most amount of trouble. See, things were getting bad in the Arizona territory. Outlaws and cowboys were running rampant, and the local law simply couldn't keep up with them. In fact, it seemed like every time the law would put one of these criminals behind bars, two more would take their place. People had reached a boiling point in Tombstone, and they decided that if the law couldn't protect them from these criminals, then they would take matters into their own hands. A group of 25 men met together in secret and formed what would become known as the Committee of Safety. Their mission was to clean up the streets of Tombstone once and for all, and they began by bringing order to the jail. They broke into the facility and removed all of the prisoners, lining them up against the wall. Then they asked each man what they had been locked up for. For some, it was minor charges, and the committee released them. Others had more serious charges and were held for further review. Then came Russian Bill and the Clanton brothers, along with Johnny Ringo. Each of them had serious charges against them. But as they stood silently before the committee, the men realized that they were not the ones who had committed the most crimes. That honor went to one man in particular. His name was Joseph Book, and he had been arrested so many times for so many different reasons that the local jail had given up holding him. In fact, the jailer had given Book a nickname, Three-Fingered Jack, because he had lost the tip of one of his middle fingers. According to the jailer, Book had cut off his own finger because he couldn't afford to pay his debt, and since then, he had stolen more than 300 head of cattle. Not to mention, he had been arrested for assault, rape, and murder. So when the committee heard all this, they wasted no time with Book. They took him outside and hanged him, making sure that he died slowly, so that he would have plenty of time to think about what he had done with his life. But the committee didn't want to stop there. They wanted to send a message to the rest of the criminals in the territory that they meant business. So they turned their attention to Russian Bill, Ike Clanton, and Johnny Ringo. They took the three men outside and asked them why they should show them any mercy. Russian Bill stepped forward and told the committee that he had been nothing but honest since coming to Tombstone. He begged for his life, saying he would never cause trouble again. But the committee didn't believe him. They knew that he was one of the ringleaders of the Cowboys and had a hand in more crimes than he was willing to admit. As for Ike Clanton, he tried to play the charming rogue, telling the committee that he had a wife and children back east and didn't want to leave them without a father. Johnny Ringo was quiet throughout the whole ordeal, but when asked what he had to say for himself, he simply replied, "I am innocent." The committee didn't care about any of it. They knew that these men were guilty of too many crimes to count and weren't going to show them any mercy. They led the three men outside and hanged them. All three were dead within minutes. And that was the end of Russian Bill. Some say that he was actually a Russian nobleman, but most historians agree that he was a criminal who happened to be well-dressed and looked good. Whatever the truth may be, he died a villain, swinging from a rope outside of Tombstone. And that is the end of our story. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please feel free to subscribe and give me a thumbs up on this video. You can also follow me on social media. Until next time, y'all be safe.